Welcome everybody to Cycle Jerks Podcast, episode 110. We're excited today to be joined by Nicky Bradwell, host of his own podcast, the Bike Minded Podcast. And I'm here with Dave Dalton, and Dave's still in Cape Cod on a extended vacation. And Nicky, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
if this show was R-rated, I would show you my sunburn, but maybe that's not appropriate for this one.
He's also got a tattoo. But anyway, Nicky, where are you from originally?
Oh God, originally I'm grew up in Cool, California. If you've ever done a lake loop, you're familiar with passing through Cool, but Cool and like Loomis area, so Placer County boy through and through. So
nice. Yeah, we did a 24-hour race up in Cool.
Oh really?
Yeah, we had a 4-person team, and it was with Dave used to own a bike shop here in Danville, and his mechanic Dan and I and a couple other guys that were affiliated with the shop. Yeah, we went up there and had a great event. It was super fun. But
absolutely, yeah. Cool's kind of a weird area. You know, it's like this. We lived in like the gated community that's up there, where basically everybody lives, and so it's kind of like this odd, like it's a community, but it's not really a community, and it's in the middle of nowhere. You know, kind of in the sticks. But yeah, we moved out of there. I was like 5 years old by the time we moved out of there. Grew up more or less in Loomis area. So.
Okay. Well, Nicky and I kind of we roll around in the same circles, but we never actually met. So I help out the cycling team Enjoy, and with Vince Murdoch and Sean Remy and all the guys on the team, Fergie and etc. And yeah, Nicky and I ride with a lot of those guys a lot of times, and just for whatever reason we just never quite connected. So there we are. Now we're connected.
Yeah, it's like we're like a degree away from each other at all times. Like I know of you through I've talked to Sean a number of times in regards to you, and he mentions you, and of course everybody else has ridden with you a bunch of times. And I'm like, yeah, it's odd we've never linked up, but this is a great way, you know, just throwing ourselves into it, see what similarities and stuff we got going on. I see you got your Enjoy shirt on. I guess I'm not being a loyal team member by not having any of my swag on, but
just happened to work out that way this morning. I thought, oh yeah, Nicky's coming on. I'll rock the Enjoy.
Yeah, I love it, man. I love it.
The list of asses he's kissed is long and distinguished, so that's why you got
oh,
got to do it, man. Got to do it,
man. Dave. Oh my gosh. All right. Whatever. So growing up in Cool, when did you really find the bicycle for the first time, and what was there a moment like where you thought like, yeah, people ride bikes?
This is gonna find some immediate similarities, because you've posted some stuff on social media, and we all know way more people on social media than we know in real life, right?
Yes.
So I've seen some things that have popped up. So BMX is like my core. Like as a kid, I was doing, like quote unquote, what's gravel now, or mountain biking. I did on a BMX bike, riding laps around the, Folsom Lake on the horse trails and stuff. And ever since, even when I was much smaller than that, I was maybe 3 years old, mimicking what was on, as I'm sure you're familiar of the movie Rad, from the 80s.
Yes.
That is, to this day, my favorite movie of all time. I used to sit in front of my TV as a little kid on like a, bike with training wheels, and I tried to imitate all the stuff that was on the Rad movie. And so like that whole era of like flatland BMX racing was huge for me. My parents would take me ever since I think I was just maybe not even 4 when I was like on training wheels, maybe I wasn't. I can't really remember, but they would take me out to the BMX track here in Roseville. And so yeah, just from a young age, I got on a BMX bike and I was like, this is freedom. And so this is it for me. I just was obsessed from that moment forward. So anything 2 wheels just made more sense to me. And I don't know if you guys are like this, but my wife makes fun of me because I'm kind of clunky and like just walking around. I don't like, even just walking, I'm way worse at than being on a bicycle. Like bicycles just make more sense to me than like just even navigating the world on my own 2 feet. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
agree,
So
100%. I
Yeah.
gotta
yeah.
tell you guys, I grew up on the East Coast, and maybe I'm just clueless, but I don't think BMX was a thing back when growing up, because so many people that come on the show are West Coast based, and they talk about how their love of BMX and that was how they got their start. And I'm thinking, I had a bike that looked like a BMX bike, but there were I don't remember tracks near my house. I don't remember people doing stupid, other than in the street, lining the kids up on the road and jumping them,
Yeah.
lining your
Mhm.
neighbors up and jumping over them. It just didn't happen. It's funny.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. I think that whole
feel left out.
BMX
I feel
thing,
left out.
emerging in LA, and I think it's a
Yeah.
timeline thing because I'm 36, so that was like definitely in full swing by the time, the late 80s, early 90s, all that stuff when I was really, really going at it as a kid, probably mostly early 90s. But yeah, LA was, where that all started, I think, for the most part. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
after the whole like Schwinn, people would take their, Schwinn bikes that weren't really like BMX bikes, and they were smashing them so hard that I think that's right when they started making BMX bikes in LA. So I think it took a while, I think, for that to spread.
yeah, it was a West Coast movement. I mean, I was there kind of like not at the very, very beginning, but shortly after it was established. Um, yeah, that was my era. And so we always had a little extra in the tank for any time the LA guys would come to NorCal, because the magazines were all in LA. And these guys were
Mm-hmm.
in LA getting all this run. And we felt like NorCal had a really good BMX scene. So anytime like, Perry Kramer or Pete Lonkervich or any of these guys would come down or come up from LA,
Mm-hmm.
it was like very competitive. But
I bet.
it
Yeah.
was also super fun because we would take them to our local jump spots, and yeah, we had some amazing sessions with, it's cool because like there was a part in our town where it was called the Creek, and I spent a lot of time out there building jumps, but everybody, all the local people and you knew what they could do, and everybody was kind of like, after you've seen them ride a few times, you kind of know what's in their bag. But then all of a sudden, all these really good LA riders come down and they start riding these jumps for the first time, and just seeing how they would interpret it and what they would do. It just
Mm-hmm.
kind of helped us grow as riders. But then when we get to the race, it's NorCal,
Yeah.
SoCal. It's on. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I get that. And in regards to that, did you do any of that flatland type
Oh
freestyle
yeah,
stuff?
yeah. We had a
Yeah.
team. It was called Hip It Trick, and we would
Oh, I love it.
we performed at high schools, and like we did a bunch of like shopping centers. Somehow I got hooked in
Mm-hmm.
with this guy that was a developer, and he was doing shopping centers. And then when he get done with a shopping center, he would say, "Hey, I got this thing all on lock, and these kids come and ride their bikes, and it's a big turnout." And so yeah, we did like four
Yeah,
or
I
five
kind of
reps.
wish I had gotten into that a little bit more as I got older. I just went more into bike, like doing the racing a little bit more,
Yeah.
BMX racing. But the flatland thing, I even had other like old, and I don't even know how my parents got a hold of these, but I had VHS tapes of like those shows where they
Yeah.
would have like a couple ramps laid out at some shopping center, and dudes would be doing, flatland BMX stuff, and then they'd be hitting the ramps or whatever. And so that combined with like the rad movies, that was my whole identity. And
Yeah.
so like that was everything for me, and that kind of formed this, as you were asking earlier, that was just, I was locked in. And I mean, from that point forward, everything was bikes and always has been, basically.
Yeah.
Are are you still that, or have you made when did you start making a transition? Because I
away
away into
from
road
away
or
from like the BMX to road thing. That was kind of a long journey because I got more into like dirt bikes. I've always been around motocross and dirt bikes since I was little, but wasn't, kind of a confusing childhood because my dad raced motorcycles and dirt bikes, but started at a later age. But since I was little, he's like, yeah, like dirt bikes are life. Like that was everything for us. So that's all I ever wanted to do. But he was also very aware how dangerous dirt bikes were. And so I wasn't really allowed to race from a young age. So I kind of had to do the BMX thing because I wasn't allowed to race dirt bikes and things like that. So that
Because
transition,
BMX, because flat
yeah, go ahead.
landing on a BMX is much safer than a motorcycle, right? Flying off ramps and
Basically everything is more safe than dirt bikes
Yeah,
for
I
the
think there's
most
something
part.
to it. Yeah.
I think there's maybe the one thing I could, then people will probably roast me. There's a gazillion things that are, up there, but maybe those like Red Bull athletes that have the like wingsuits that like,
Yeah. Oh
they go
yeah.
Mach 5 in between like rocks and shit. Yeah, I think that
yeah.
might be more dangerous, but um
The
yeah, so
flying
I
squirrel.
yeah, those flying squirrel suits, yeah. And I get the hesitation. I have two toddlers, and we can, talk about that whole fatherhood side. But I get their hesitation. Like motocross right now is remarkably dangerous. I mean, they're making the tracks insanely hard, and you have to be on a level of being basically an NFL professional athlete on that tier of like skill wise, just to make it to those top couple 3 to 5 positions to make a career out of it. And so, I get their hesitation in that. So the BMX thing was kind of something I did for a long time. I played some high school sports and things like that, and was, did okay in basketball and things like that. But I always wanted to be on two wheels, like since I was little. So later in high school, started racing dirt bikes once they were, they kind of had no choice but to let me do it. So raced
Yeah.
some dirt bikes. And then the road bike thing came about just because I wanted to cross train. I was like, well, if I want to be good at this, a lot of the top level athletes are all on road bikes and they'll take their days off and they ride road bikes. And so, built myself a Franken bike out of, my dad had some old Cannondale that I don't know why he had it. He's kind of a hoarder, so he has just one of everything kind of guy. Like I said, mostly motorcycles. He's big into vintage motorcycles, but for some reason he had this old Cannondale that had like really old, like Ultegra components on it.
That's all you
And so
need.
I swapped that onto some specialized frame that I had found and made this Franken bike out of it. And from there, I was just, I was pretty damn into it from the moment I hit that, because I was like, man, I could go fast as hell on these. I was just realized how fast you could go, and then I was immediately hooked. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a journey.
It's funny how you say that with the moto guys getting into road, because that's what got me going on road too. As a BMX kid, I remember the aforementioned Pete Lonkervich. Pete Lonkervich was in BMX action riding a road bike, and
Yeah,
uh, and he was talking about how he's doing this training and it's like helping him on the track and his explosiveness and all this stuff. And yeah, and so I got a road bike and started riding road bike. You're just trying to win, So
yeah,
and you see these guys in LA. And the thing about LA was that they were racing all the time. Like here in NorCal,
Mhm.
we've eventually got to it where you could race like maybe 4 times a week, 4 or 5 times a week. But in LA, they're just running all the time. You could race 3 races on a Saturday. And so
yeah,
yeah, and everything just seemed bigger and better down there, because it was getting hyped up by the magazines and whatnot. So, but Lonkervich was like one of the really successful guys, and I think it was really important that they showed that road bike in the BMX magazine, because I think it opened a lot of young kids' eyes up to, hey, this is not just something for your dad or these old
hmm
mammals, these middle-aged men in
yeah.
lycra, you know. Uh,
Yeah, and I think that the biggest transition for me, and I don't know, like, so I kind of got into it in that regard of wanting to go faster, and I saw the fun in it, and then the fixed gear scene kind of emerged at a very specific age for me, and that's kind of how I got introduced to Sean eventually down the road too. Is like I was this, I was bopping around Midtown Sacramento, and got myself a fixed gear during that whole like massive movement. And so it brought a lot of people, I think, from the fixed gear world into the road world and brought this edge to the road cycling that it didn't have before. And so then I felt like I really had this home and this place, because all these younger guys that were about my age were really getting into it. And so I was like, it's not just for, you know, the trope of like dentists or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was,
Yeah.
there was a lot more character being brought into that world. And I felt like it was more me, because I've always, you know, I'm a tatted up guy, musician background, like that whole clean cut kind of like scene was not necessarily for me, and I didn't feel super welcome. But I got introduced to some really talented cyclists like Willie Myers, who's been on our
Oh
podcast
yeah.
before, who's, you know, a big name in the NorCal scene. He would drag me on some of these training rides with him and his buddies, and I had no place going on them, and they would drop me. And like, so like he was, and to this day, I just linked up with him on the bike path like last week. We just
Nice.
crossed paths and then ended up riding with each other and talked for a while. But he's someone I'll always give this this nod to, because he was kind of one of these edgier guys. And I know Willie back from, he used to go to shows when I was playing music, and I was in this, you know, screaming band when I was younger. And he was, you know, this straight edge kid that would go to all the shows. And so we knew each other through that world. And then he emerged to be this huge figure in the crit scene. And so that's how I was introduced to that world. And there's a lot of ways I got into this world. It's been kind of this slow progression to me fully accepting that like I love road cycling, and of course like mountain and all these other things I've discovered through that. But yeah, I found this home because the whole image of what a road cyclist was completely changed to me. You know, I was the one that probably was not making fun of people on the side of the road, but I was like, that's not me. You know, I'm never going to be that guy wearing Lycra
Right.
or whatever rolling around. But yeah, I think that a whole new batch of different types of characters were entering that world that I felt a little more identified with, you know, kind of how I viewed myself. So yeah.
Right.
Here,
Yeah.
I'll make a point. I'll make a point, but like, roughly what age was that you found road cycling?
Oh, probably not until early 20. So like maybe like 23,
Yeah,
somewhere in that ballpark, 23,
yeah,
24.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not. I don't mean to pontificate at all, but and then I've been down this road before. But you mentioned it that you played high school sports, and so did I. I played baseball all my life, and I played baseball all through 4 years, and I played basketball a little bit. But now that I found cycling, I look back at it and go, what a waste of my fucking time. Like, you know, if only there had been more of a, like where you're starting to see it now, these youth development programs, because we used to get on our bikes and we would ride for a long time. And for me, it was freedom, right? And
Yeah.
but there was no structure to it. And you
Yeah.
know, you find kids nowadays they're finding endurance sports, and but I still think they're lacking, other than mountain biking, I still think we're lacking these youth development programs that would just take people out of this traditional shit and get them into something that is great.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah. I think that now it's hard for me to look back on that, because I will agree with you in a lot of ways. The way that I think about it now, basketball did work really well for me, and I liked the team structure. And I think there's a lot of value in those team sports. And as I know now, as I'm getting more and more familiar with road cycling, especially, like it's a team sport. Like it requires
yeah, yeah,
everybody to be on board. Like it's so in depth and so involved. But there's no way you could have paid me back when I was younger to like try to be on some like road cycling team, at least where the sport was back then. You know, I just like, I was other, I was, you know, never wanted to, I wanted to be part of something that was so different and unique. So I would have loved like the version of me now, if I could teleport that person back to then and be a part of some road cycling. There, I was just on a ride the other day with some younger kid, and I see how disciplined and how great they're. Like, yes, I would love to be at this point in my life and be a kick-ass cyclist, because I've been working at it since I was, you know, however young.
right.
I don't think the version of myself when I was younger would have gone for it, though. I was just too angsty. I was too just like I didn't want anyone to tell me what to do. I probably wouldn't have done well with having a coach that was just coaching me. I think the team aspect of basketball worked for me in some regard.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, there's definitely a part of me now that goes, holy shit. It's like we have that Jacob Velasco that's going to be on our podcast this week, actually, for Bike Minded. And he's so disciplined and does these like incredible, just structured rides. And I see he's got this crazy bright future. And I'm just like, man, that's awesome. But I was like, man, my younger version of myself is nothing like him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
No, I
there's a
agree.
lot of peer pressure in high school, and depending on what area you go through there, for Dave and
Yeah.
I, it was all ball sports. I mean, if you wanted to have any type of social status on campus, you had to be an athlete in one of the four or three sports, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To a lesser degree,
And
maybe track and field and wrestling, but definitely football, basketball, baseball. If you were starter on the varsity, you were
yeah.
you were
And,
having a good time with the ladies.
yeah.
Indeed.
And I agree. And Nicky, I agree. The whole team aspect of it has, I think, it served me well, not only in business but in a
Yeah,
lot of other things, because you learn it ain't about you, it's really about the greater good and the team. So I agree
Yeah.
with all that. I just you know I
Yeah,
just think
no,
about
I
standing
think it's
out in
one of
left
those
field and
things. I think it's one of those things where you yeah, it's you can look back on it and be like, man, it could have just been this way, but it's just life is so funny that way. It's like it just never it could have
yeah,
been, and it could have something catastrophic could have happened. I mean, the what
yeah.
could have beens, man. We all play that game, and I think you're right. I think a lot of what do they say? What's that saying? It's like beauty is wasted on the youth or whatever. There's so many things that are wasted on the youth, and we think about that. It's like you were in your prime, and like you could have done so much, and like this version of me now looks back on that, and it's like, yeah, if you would have just discovered how awesome a road bike was when you were really young and how fast you could have gone, you would have been like, holy hell, like this is actually awesome. And then you could have discovered there's so much to this to all these disciplines. I think not to go on a tangent, but like we had Chaz Halbert who does a development mountain bike program for high schoolers. I think it's for
yeah,
Wood Creek High School, and he's a close friend of mine. His daughter and my son go to the same daycare. Like we are in kind of similar circles, and he's just a remarkable, cross country mountain biker, road cyclist. But he does that development program for mountain bikers, and I feel like maybe not road, but even if there was some sort of mountain bike program when I was younger that was like that, I would have been on board. It's like, oh, I can't
Yeah.
ride moto, but I can do this mountain bike thing. Like, hell yes. And that could have very easily slipped from, because when I was younger, it was like mountain bike. Oh, you got to have a downhill mountain bike. You got to be doing this, gnarly, like they didn't call it gravity at that point, but it was all just like the whole extreme mountain biking was the thing. So like it could have easily slipped into XC, which would have been really cool, and that would have been awesome. But those programs didn't exist. That wasn't around. So
yeah,
yeah, I think that could have been much more realistic as far as me looking back at who that person was when I was younger. That probably would have been easier than bringing a road bike around me and being like, this is actually going to be the coolest and best thing for you. Just wait and see. I probably would have been
Yeah.
like, screw you. Who the hell are you? Like, don't,
Yeah.
I couldn't have been told that, but maybe the mountain bike, I don't know, maybe it would have been
Yeah.
easier.
yeah. I mean, it's hard to say, in these different eras. I don't know. I think there's a lot of I think cycling's becoming more, obviously NICA has a lot to do with that. All the high school kids in the mountain bike racing league. It's
Yeah.
not such a fringe thing, like it was. And, when I was in high school, I rode my BMX bike. I'd do stuff. We did a freestyle show at my high school. And,
Yeah.
yeah, but I still would take a lot of shit from the jocks, because we played
Hmm.
ball sports together growing up, and then I just kind of veered off and got into bikes really hard, and so
Yeah. That was for me, that was music. So I was just a dweeb, like nerd, like nobody cared really necessarily, especially like the popular girls or anything like that. And then I
yeah,
started playing music, and that was when the attention started happening. And yeah, I got a lot of hatred from the traditional jock guys and all that stuff, because I was other than, and
Right.
I was wearing skinny jeans and had longer hair, and just, it was just a whole different thing. But yeah, when you're other than, it's you get that heat from the popular folk. That's for sure.
What kind of music?
Oh, so it eventually turned into more like we played, I guess, in the most basic term, like screamo metal, like emo music. We were very of that era, of that Warped Tour kind of time. So we played Warped Tour. I joined a band called Catherine, and we had a record label signed us, and we toured for 3-4 years around the country. So that was kind of like those were my college years, as you would put it. So not a lot of bikes going on during that period. That was kind of my
Right.
wild times, you know what I mean? But
What'd you
yeah,
do in
so
the band? Were you
I was a singer, screamer. Yeah, so I just did all the vocals.
okay? And did you play any instruments, or just
I
the front
I
man?
have dabbled with a few little things. Like I can play guitar a little bit, and I can play drums a tiny bit. But the vocal, I'm a front man.
Yeah.
That's just kind of my role in the band.
So were you guys partying real hard and living like this quote unquote rock star life, or was it?
There were times for sure. Yeah, there were some times that were pretty wild. You're young, you don't have any money. You have money to cover like cheap beer, and that's basically it. A lot of the time you aren't eating so much, so you're stick thin, and
Right.
yeah, I look back on that now as like doing more road cyclists. I'm like, man, how do I get back down to that weight? I'm like, well, basically you just have to not eat and just survive on beer and burn like 2,000 calories on stage, and you'll be stick thin in no time.
Right.
But yeah, so there's definitely a lot of wild times. There was one time we were in. I'll tell you this quick story. We were in Virginia Beach, which is like such a random place, but we were touring in Virginia Beach, and we were staying in this block of hotels, and just wild night of drinking and debauchery and wild stuff. There was like a spa or like a jacuzzi inside one of the rooms that ended up like we like completely flooded like all the carpet in the hotel room because the jacuzzi was in. So like all this mayhem is happening. Just yeah, I don't even know how to explain what it was. There was like people that were actually like running nude on the beach in the middle of the night. So there was that happened at one point in the evening. But the real kicker to this whole story is someone threw like some sort of like small firework that was like maybe an M80 or something into the pool that like was emptied or something. Very Virginia Beach. I don't know if you've been to Virginia Beach, but it's a weird place. But anyway, threw an M80 in there, so that caused this huge like almost bomb type sound, and then the SWAT team got called in to assess the whole situation. They had like SWAT team members running up the stairs of this hotel, and I'm walking around in like board shorts, and I'm sure I had like a couple beers in my hand or something, I don't know. And the SWAT team guy rolls up to me and asks me like where this party is happening, and I like just pointed in the other direction, and then just like kept walking nonchalantly because I'm sure I was fairly intoxicated. But anyways, yeah, so that's that kind of stuff. Those are highlight stories. Most nights it's boring. It's like you're sleeping in a van with just a bunch of other guys that are sweaty and gross, and you're driving 6-7 hours during the night after a show that you're completely exhausted. You show up to the show, set up all the gear, do the same thing the next night. You get paid next to nothing, just enough to make it to the next show. And it's a wild existence. Looking back on it now, there's no way I could last even 2 nights living that way now. But when you're young,
so
spirit.
I thought this was going to be about a story about making a transition from BMX to road, but now how do you snap out of that lifestyle and go back to road?
I'm a mellow. I'm a relatively mellow guy. Like I liked that life for a short period of time, but it's intense, you know. So it wasn't that hard for me to like switch back. I mean, I wasn't born to be that kind of like live that rock star lifestyle. There's some people that like you can just sense it's in them and they need to live that life. They're at a 10 at all times, but it wasn't that easy for me to distance myself. I started getting more serious about I've always like at that point in time, I still was really passionate about dirt bikes and racing motorcycles. And actually, while we were recording one of our albums, I had no idea this conversation was going to go here about the band and the whole thing, but you guys are getting the whole story. But
Yeah.
so I had bought a dirt bike while I was up there recording an album in Oregon, and my dad had been there for a few days with us to record the album. He just wanted the experience, I think, to be there during the recording process. And it was kind of a cool experience, you know, father son deal where he could see like what it's like to record an album
That's cool.
in a
And
studio.
what it's like to have people run around nude too. I mean, you know.
Yeah, no, he had to get that preview. You know, he
Uh,
had to see what the lifestyle was like a little bit. And I think, you know, he lasted a couple nights, but so he ended up driving this dirt bike that we had purchased while we were in Oregon because you don't have to pay, you know, taxes while you're up there. So he drove this dirt bike back because he had drove there from, you know, where they live in like Loomis at the time, and drove it back. And then at that point, I started getting more serious about riding dirt bikes and, you know, trying to race a lot more. And I've always been wanting to be more serious about dirt bikes, like since I was young, but also kind of was repeated like how dangerous it is. So it's not one of those sports where you can live with that thought in the back of your head because it's like it's so intense. It's the same reason why a lot of people in moto go into crit racing because it's just so holds your hand to the flame. Like it's constant intensity, it's constant decision making. Um, and so I think that's where you see a lot of like people that have retired from moto that are getting into crit racing and things like that. But anyways, you can't really hold that idea, that hesitation in your mind while you're that person. And I think no matter what was going to happen in that sport, I would never make it to some higher level. A, because I didn't start when I was like 12 or 10 years old. You know, I started when I was 17 or 16, 17. You got to start even younger than that. A lot of these kids start when they're like 7, 8 years old racing competitively. So then that kind of turned to, I started doing more moto, but also doing more cross training on the road bike. And then, I think once I decided to do my first Grand Fondo. I did Levi's Grand Fondo, and that was the first ride I actually trained for. I ended up getting a carbon bike at that point. And like once I started experiencing real rides and real training, and then I just got the bug, man. Started doing some crit races, met actually one of my moto buddies, or I knew of him through moto, and we weren't friends yet. Keith Knight. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with him. He's on the gosh dang it, Sierra Nevada team. Keith Knight is like a very well respected pro motocross racer that has since learned that, like, you know, same deal. Like he raced pro, tried to do his thing, wasn't able to make the top ranks of the pro motocross world, and started doing crit racing. And you know, met him at this registration for, I think it was Folsom Crit, and was like, hey, like, you know, I know you through the moto world. And then I started finding this community in crit racing and in road racing. And then that, you know, has basically just, you know, taken over my life from that point. Got more structured, learned the ins and outs of the sport. Constantly I'm learning. And, you know, it's just this well of, you know, learning what disciplines I want to do, which ones I don't want to do. But yeah, I've just been full on, not just road. I mean, I've learned that in my natural abilities are actually more in XC and you know, the more of the cross country and in cyclocross. Both of those serve me a lot better because having that moto background, I'm able to read terrain really quickly and to just be able to handle rougher riding conditions. So as much as I love road and I envision myself, I'm like, yeah, I love road riding, but like at the end of the day, that comes down to a lot more fitness, and you have to weigh 90 pounds in order to be competitive. And, I'm, around 180 pounds. So it limits me a little bit there, but, yeah, so that's kind of the journey. Probably gave you guys more information than you were wanting, but
No.
I didn't know, did anyone in Catherine go on to be rich and famous in the music world?
no, we had a few members that have been in some other bands that got to be part of some really big tours, and I know people by proximity that we toured with that made it pretty big, and were able to do big things. But that whole scene, that whole like screamo and emo and metal scene, you can only get so large because mainstream just you'll never find that success. Like the biggest metal band is going to be like Metallica's and things like that. People honestly, I don't think really want to hear that much screaming. It's a very niche thing, and you can find success and you can make an okay career potentially, but you're never going to make, you're never going to be at that level with that type of music, because it's a very specific audience that wants to hear that. So yeah.
Right.
All right, so let's move into the Bike Minded podcast. What was the idea behind it, and what made you want to do a podcast about cycling?
I just I find that my wife doesn't want to listen to that much of my ramblings about cycling, and by little it's like none. She doesn't want to hear anything about it. So and my sons aren't old enough yet for them to really care all that much either. So I kind of joke on that front, but it was Matt LaPrade from AE Service Course and we love having conversations. I am a big podcast fanatic. Like I love them. I'm a fan. I listen to just a ton of podcasts, mainly because I run my own business. I run my own small business. I don't have really employees. I have a employee that helps me with my business a few days out of the month. So it's just me here and my dog. And so podcasts are a huge part of my life. So that was kind of the preface there. And I approached Matt and was like, hey, do you want to like maybe do this weekly podcast? It'll give us an excuse to hang out, have some coffee, talk shit about bikes. You have the technical know-how of mechanical aspect of cycling, and he has a real depth of knowledge in like, tour riders and, the history of the sport. And he's just a real wealth of knowledge, Matt.
Yeah.
And I have more of just an obsession with the ins and outs. I'm kind of learning as I go through the sport. And I think that resonates with a lot of people, because I feel like a lot of people are trying to get into it, but there's a lot of intimidation. And there's a lot of like, well, should I do this race? Should I do this? Should I even be racing? Should I just be having fun? There's a lot of aspects I wanted to kind of navigate through in real time. And I think that the podcast gives me that ability to do so. And so yeah, it's just like, let's see how it works. And so it gave us this excuse to just sit down once a week and chat and interview some guests here and there, but not bring a lot of stress to it. And we don't have a lot of structure. We're just like a weekly hang where we talk about bikes and we invite other people to be a part of our conversations. So yeah, it just started with a real basic conversation between Matt and I. And Matt currently is, navigating a very busy business, so he's not there all the time. We've since brought Erin O'Hagan, who's, Sean Remy's girlfriend. They've been together for quite some time. And I met her through Sean, and she's a social media person, a big figure in the space for women. And I like having that women perspective as well.
For sure.
And yeah, it's just kind of, it's this thing we're learning as we go through it, but it's really just an excuse for us to hang out and record our conversations. Yeah. Give some insight.
But if you read if you read the profile, it look like a little bit of a different angle, because it's really like, yeah, it's bikes, but we shoot the shit. And you said if you want to talk about football, you want to talk about all this other stuff. So you get off on a lot of different topics, right?
Yes. And that comes from my angst as well. Like I don't like having rules necessarily. I don't like I just really don't like being told what to do, I guess. I kind of run to the beat of my own drum. So like in that vein of having just a very candid conversation and having no structure, we may go off on a completely random tangent. And I don't want to interject that with like, oh, but we're here to talk about this. And sometimes we
Right.
do that. We have to course correct, but lives are messy. Like I will go off on a tangent about daycare and how my kid got kicked out of daycare for XYZ thing. And that kind of gets us off into this parenting conversation. And I think that's how my real conversations go on rides with people that are obviously obsessed with cycling. And we can talk about cycling till cows come home.
Yeah.
And that's great. And a lot of the podcast episodes go that way. But then some of them will go in just wild ass directions. And we're not really censored. We talk about things that are rough and offensive sometimes, like not really trying to like be offensive, but we
Right.
just speak candidly. And I think it speaks to a lot of people. You know, they just want to be a part of a conversation that has these ebbs and flows. And you know, it may go in a completely random direction. Now we do have episodes where we interview people, and those are a lot more structured. And so that's usually just me. I'll interview like Derek Teal from Dialed Health or Chaz, who I mentioned earlier, and I respect their space, and I want to dive into, you know, what makes them, but I also want to bring up some things with those guys that they might not be asked typically, you know, and just kind of push the envelope in that direction. So yeah, there's just a lack of structure, and I think that brings about the most natural conversation, and that's kind of my goal coming into it. And I have enough stress outside of this podcast. I don't want to make my podcast a stressful thing on top
Right.
of running a business and all the other shit. So, and also I listen to a lot of cycling podcasts. I know that there's plenty of other cycling podcasts where you're going to find out exactly how not good of a cyclist you are. You know,
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about data with pros. Like I get it. Like you guys can put in a slow week for you is 12, 15 hours, which is just insane. You know, I want to get on the same level with people that are like, I don't know when I'm going to be able to train this week. You know, that's more like our audience, you know, like let's try to figure out how you can, I don't know, maximize with this insane life that we've all got going on. So,
Well,
yeah.
one of the things I like about your podcast is the parenting component because you know, when I was a young parent, I wasn't able to give it the time that it needed. And so I know that's something you're struggling with. So when I listen, I can totally identify with that. And I actually got completely off the rails. I was only riding a dirt jumper. And I mean, to this day, my Instagram's Pump Track Mike. I don't even have a pump track bike anymore, you know.
Yeah.
But during that time when my kids were young, I could still pump track and be very, let's say, competitive or whatever. You know, I still had enough skill from the BMX tank, and it didn't require a high level of fitness. It does require some fitness, but you know, that's not the thing with pump tracking. So, um, yeah, I went completely out of fitness. Gained a bunch of weight and wasn't feeling good about myself, and then kind of got back on track about, I don't know, it's probably been 15 years now, but yeah, when the kiddos are young, it's really hard. And yeah, it takes a lot of discipline to get it done and still be there like you need to be there as a young father. So yeah, I think a lot of people that listen to your podcast could really identify with that.
Yeah, it's been something to where obviously now we have a lot more tools. So like indoor trainers and all that kind of stuff to give us the ability to at least do something
Yep.
to kind of stay in the game. But also I think it's important to have that conversation of like, man, it's just none of us are robots, man. You know, like none of us are going to be able to just plug in whatever training plan and or whatever your goals are, you know, even just getting on the bike and just in general, not even having training, but just getting that little dopamine hit of like being out on your bike outdoors. I think it takes a lot of us, especially going through that period where Matt is also going through too,
Yep.
with a little, you know, little toddlers and infants, it's such a difficult period as a father to be also like the husband to a wife who's going through so much, and they're stretched like even way more thin than we are. So I think having those conversations is just nice for everybody's mental health, to be like, I'm not alone in this. And I think we're hitting some spots there, and I think it resonates with a good chunk of people, because you know, you may find cycling just because you're going through this period as a father and whatever, or a new dad, where like so much, there's just so much stress in your life and in everyone's lives around you, that like you're just trying to find this little bit of solace in going out on a bike ride or whatever. But it is nice to hear people say that that's like, it's normal to not be able to do all that stuff. You know,
Yeah.
it's normal to struggle to find all of that. And I think bringing some of that, a little bit of, we don't claim to be a place for people to improve their mental health, but I think the byproduct of our show is to give a little bit of that. It's okay to be a person, and to struggle, and to not be able to be just like Joe whoever on his Strava, who's logging 250 miles a week and has a training this, and it seems like his family's all together and everything's perfect. It's like, man, you know, shit sucks sometimes. It just
Yeah.
sucks, you know.
Yeah.
It just does. And so yeah,
Yeah.
so I try to be as real and transparent as I can.
We had Phil Guyman on the podcast, and to your point about these pros, Phil was great, really fun, loose guy,
Mhm.
but doesn't take himself too serious. I think he does internally, obviously, because the level he's at, but he doesn't project that. But yeah, when you start talking about power numbers and he kind of threw out, you're curious too, like
Sure.
I have
So
a genuine,
especially someone like Phil, you know,
yeah,
like you don't want to necessarily ask a, you know, no name like me or whoever, but like Phil Guyman, it's like, well, how do you not ask about numbers? Because he's just a monster.
yeah. And yeah, it was just interesting. He was explaining, he was making a run at the Everesting record, and he, I think he did like, I don't know, he did half of it, and he was just like, yeah, it just wasn't going to be. And we were talking about power numbers, and it was, I forget, it was like, I don't know, it's like, I want to say it was like 400 watts or something, some crazy unrelatable thing. It's just like, well, maybe he misspoke or something, that can't be real.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just wild when so I get what you're saying about having these pros on and listen to their power
Yeah.
numbers. We've had a bunch of different people on from all different walks of life in the bike industry. You mentioned Matt, Aaron,
Mhm.
Derek. Those have all been guests on the show, and yeah, we try to mix it up as much as we can.
But I think
Absolutely.
and I think it's absolutely critical. Yeah, we do. I think we've been fortunate that we got Guyman on, but that's because I think you just hit something earlier, Nicky, that, you know, look, Lance has got his podcast, Jens
Right.
has got his, right? There's enough of those people, and there's no way that we are ever going to be as credible as them talking about the tour or numbers and all that other shit. But there's so many other cyclists, as you said, that they just don't know, what's the difference between this bike and this bike, right? And what's the difference? Like, we had somebody talk about nutrition, right? Because there's
Yeah.
so many people that, as you said, are intimidated by this sport. And that's the
Yeah.
barrier for them getting into it. And that's kind of what I want to do, is just give them basic knowledge, so that they're not intimidated. And you mentioned women, right? So think how intimidating it is for women to get into the sport, right? So
Remarkably.
you
Yeah.
say,
I was just
Yeah.
talking to
yeah.
Aaron about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It is really
So
tough. We've had several pro women on the show, and then we had Ariana Malelli. She's like USA Cycling up and coming young person, and
did you just see that
yeah,
she got under 9 hours at Leadville?
yeah, 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 yeah,
Right out
yeah.
of high. She's 2 years out of high school, I think.
Yeah,
Wow.
Wow.
she's really incredible. She's got a great attitude. She worked at Mike's Bikes in Pleasanton for a while, so she kind of has the industry side of it plus the athlete, and she's got a good head on her shoulders. And but it's always interesting getting Aaron and other women's perspectives, because like today's point and yours, it's like it can be intimidating for guys, and it's basically a bunch of dudes when it comes to cycling. And then
Yeah.
occasionally there's like a woman or a girl on a ride, and it's like it's always so great. I always feel like I gotta ride next to her for a little bit because I want to get to know her and find out. She's obviously uh, not cut from the same cloth as a lot of women, and so
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, but yeah, the sport can be really intimidating, and yeah, and yeah, Lance and Yenzi, those guys are going to break down world tour stuff, but sometimes it could be fun just listening to a couple dudes just talking shit about pro racing that we don't have the insights, or
Yeah.
what's happening in the team car or what the director sportif is saying, but we could still talk shit and give our 2 cents on it, and I think people respond to that too.
I think the benefit too with podcasting is that you get this, like, it's long form because you're sitting down for such a long period of time every week, and you just get to know. I'm just reiterating what's happening with like a lot of the relationships I have with the podcast people I listen to. And it's such a long form that these people that are listening that I don't necessarily know are going along on this journey with me. And so there's this bit where I'm like, maybe I'm just telling my experience with it. And I guess there's just nothing more genuine than, like, at the end of the day, there's somebody that comes up to me and maybe DMs us on the Instagram. And this guy hit me up not too long ago and he's like, hey, I have this big ride, and you guys had talked briefly about ketones, and I have nowhere near enough knowledge about ketones to like give real, like, this is what's going to happen and this and that. But I told him, like, he said, hey, there's this ride has this much climbing, this and this, and he came to me for this advice. It's like, I'm just Johnny Nobody, but
Right.
he,
Yeah.
and so I said, this is what I, on a similar ride, this is what I would do. I, do this thing, ketones, I put this in my bottles, blah, 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 try this out. Came back to me, it worked brilliantly for him. But it's like, only people only believe that because it's just, I'm just giving this unsolicited, and I'm trying not to do anything that's going to endanger anybody. Obviously, I'm not going to like
Right.
suggest something to somebody that's out of their control, but this is somebody who always already has experience with this. They're just trying to figure out what to do. And you get to give this like long term, hey, I'm learning in real time, and we all get to like watch what this is. And I think that just really resonates with most people, because it's like, so much of this stuff is, if you find some YouTube influencer or whoever, like, they've got brand deals, they've got this, they've got whatever. You don't know what's real and what's not. And I'm not claiming to be the most real person, but I don't have ties to anything, like, I genuinely don't. I'm
Yeah.
just a guy who has, a recording studio out of his business that he runs. Um, no brand deals, no nothing like that. I'm just trying to like tell this story of a guy who's navigating some sort of cycling fitness and semblance and relationship with cycling that I think a lot of people get. I don't stand there and go, this is the kind of person I am. Like, these are the disciplines.
Right.
I'm like learning in real time. Like, these are what work for me and this is why. And I think it's refreshing to know for most people that, like, yeah, this guy's struggling to figure all this stuff out too. And that's okay to struggle. To like, I'll document my race experience. If I go to a race, I like to give like a recap of what happened. Um, and I think that it's refreshing to know that, like, as prepared as you can be for something, and as much as you feel like, oh, I'm in peak fitness or whatever, or maybe you're feeling really great, but then you get that kick to the nuts of like going to some race event and then just it sucks. And just being real about that. Like, this sucked. Like, I hated it and it wasn't fun. And like, maybe the next week I recap and say like, oh, this is another realization I had about it.
Right.
I think there's just a lot of, we all crave genuine experience from other people. And I think that that's just at the end of the day what I want to, give
Well,
out.
I'm glad you touched on that because I think that's really a big part of the success of podcasts is the fact that, I mean, even like some of the biggest podcasters, they do have sponsors, but because it's such a long form, you really feel like those people. Like I listen to Rogan all the time, right? And Rogan's got his AG1 and whatever else. He's got Alpha Brain, all kinds of things that he promotes. But because he has so much content, the conversations are 3 hours long, and I feel like I know the guy. I've never met him or anything, but I feel like I understand him. And then also juxtapose that with like what's happening with the news. And, you know, you got the news, you got the right wing news, you got the left wing news, and it's like they're both full of shit. And it's all run by the pharmaceuticals and the insurance companies that are paying for the advertising. It's like, I think people are genuinely seeking these relationships with people that they can trust, even if you're not an expert. You have some
Yeah.
experience, you've been doing it a while. And to your point, we're all human, we struggle, but you find these little, the more we do it, like the three of us probably ride bikes a lot more than most people, that even most people that are listening to your podcast. And
Yeah.
so we do have some practical experience that we can share with them, and it comes from an honest place. We're not sponsored by Cliff Bar or Hammer Nutrition or anything like that. You know, we love those brands. They're good brands, but they're not coloring anything that we're saying. You know, like if I use whatever and
Mm-hmm.
it works for me, I'm happy to share that. And if I have a bad experience with something, I'll mention that too. You know, hey, it didn't work out for me. Maybe I don't have the formula right or whatever. And so
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that there's that trust that people are seeking, and you can't trust the television anymore. That's been proven. And so yeah, the
Yeah.
long form, and also just the format, you know, the TV is seven, you know, what are they, 7 to 8 minute segments, and then they go to a commercial. And to get into like a nuanced discussion about nutrition or just even training programs or whatever, they don't talk about that stuff on TV, but it would be very difficult to do in these little short form sound bites, uh, you know.
Yeah. And I think another aspect to this is like podcasts you could just turn on and you're in the middle of conversation with people, which is really special. And I think when you enter the sport and maybe you don't have all the coolest kit and the dopest bike, and so you feel kind of intimidated to like approach a group of people that are talking about whatever, if
Yeah.
it's at a coffee shop or on a ride, and maybe you don't have a group of people to ride with yet, and that sucks. But you know you'll eventually get there, but it is nice for people to have those conversations and to learn and to be a part of something that you know they don't. I don't know, it's just hard in real life sometimes for people when they don't feel like they have that yet. I now, after however many years, have found like this real core, and through like Enjoy, it's been great because I've met so many great people through that.
Yeah.
It takes you a while to get those friendships and to find your place and your identity in the sport, and in the community. So it's nice to just, maybe that gives them the confidence to approach people eventually and be like, you know, a lot of these people are just like me, so like I'll just, you know, put myself in with those people and say what's up, and you know, meet some new folks, because a lot of aspects, not just racing is of course intense, because it's like, man, you're putting your body and your bike and your life on the on the
Yeah.
line to line up at some of these. And so that's its own thing. But even just socializing with people can be a lot, especially if you're in some of these like really trendy areas, like if you're in the Bay or something, and you know it's a rack full of S Works, you know, custom built bikes and whatever, like, you know, it can all be pretty intimidating. So yeah, I think podcasts serve so many things, and at the end of the day, that's probably what drove me to be someone that contributes to it and is part of it, because I like it so much. I think it's powerful. I think it's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think it's important. And you know, when I first started getting back into it, it was all about music. I would just put in the earbud and it'd be playlists. It's all about your
Mm-hmm.
playlist. Build that playlist and keep. But the more, I mean, now it's when I'm on the bike, it's a podcast, and you just kind of you just go away from. I mean, you're still engaged on the bike, but you're involved in this conversation. It's an interesting kind of flow state you kind of get into where,
And it allows you to actually train better being listening to podcasts, because I
yeah,
listen to podcasts too. But man, if I put some hype playlist on, man, I'm blowing through just like
uh,
I'm the most inefficient cyclist of all time. I'm just like just trying to hit record numbers for no reason. It's
Uh-huh.
like being on a BMX bike when I was a young kid. It's just like you're hitting red line like right out the gate. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny how
Funny.
youngster, you never think about like riding your BMX bike as like training, you know.
yeah.
That was never in the nomenclature
Mm-mm.
whatsoever, you know.
Yeah.
But you were realize it or not. But yeah, I'm the same. If I sometimes the podcast won't, I don't download them, so I'm streaming them. You get in these zones where there's nothing, and so then I'll put some music in, and then I realize like, man, this really influences me, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I'm just blowing gas when otherwise maybe I shouldn't be or whatever. But yeah,
Music has that effect on you sometimes where it's like even in a race or a ride or whatever where you get that second win, like music does that to where it's so motivating, it literally like compels your body to do more than you think. So that's where it gives you the sneak peek into what a lot of people realize as they train more and more and more or race more. Your brain has the ability to tell your body like shut up, like
yeah,
you're gonna do it because
right.
the music is going to motivate you to do so, but you can learn to train your brain to do that. But yeah, that's
Well,
a whole nother avenue.
we had this guest on, Marie Soleil Blay, and she's a Canadian gal, and she's high level, like world championship level. She finished second in the worlds twice to Allison Jackson. But
Hmm.
she had this really interesting thing that she did where like not knowing the numbers. She read a book. Dave's reading the book now, but it was basically don't limit yourself by the numbers on the screen. Kind of I'm paraphrasing, but she went out and did a 20-minute FTP and she improved it by 18%. And I keep talking about this because it kind of speaks to what you're talking about. It's like whether you realize it or not, when you're looking at those numbers or the coach is giving you that number, you got to put 330 on the 330 watts for 20 minutes. That's what you got to do. And so that becomes the goal. Not that you'd like try to go 350 or whatever the number, 250. Let's make it more reasonable. 220 to 250. You just kind of get to that number and just be like, okay, I'm there. Now I just got to hang on for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting how the mind and the body and a cyclist, we realize like you can just the body, the brain has got to be driving the whole operation,
Hmm.
you know. We did a
Absolutely.
podcast recently. We called it, what was it? 80% mental, 40% physical.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's something that a lot of us cyclists tap into.
Absolutely. Yep. Got to push through it.
Yeah. The thing
Hey,
is that
so
go ahead, Dave.
no, because I was just a completely different topic. So go ahead and finish that.
I
Finish
was just
that.
going to say, like, at the end of a race or something, or even a group ride, a competitive group ride, a lot of times, when you're, let's say you're going to try to win or you're going to try to, whatever place, everyone that you're riding against is going through the same thing that you're going through. You're all suffering. Your legs are burning, your back hurts, maybe your hands are numb, whatever.
Yep.
There's all kinds of shit happening, and everyone is doing it. And it's like
Hmm.
you're all playing poker, right? You're just looking at each other, and like some guys got the stone cold killer face, and the other guys look like he's about to die. And that guy that looks like he's about to
Hmm.
die might be the one that wins it all. And it's like, who
Yeah.
can push through in those moments? That's where it's become so mental. And that's one of the things I think that a lot of us love about the sport. Whether it's even you don't have to race to get that. It could be a personal challenge. But
Yeah, like you said, any of those group rides, it's hard enough just not to get dropped on some of the ones. I mean, locally there's a handful that are pretty heated in this area if you decide to go and do those race rides, which, it's basically racing.
yeah,
And a whole nother podcast episode will be dedicated to the state of, Northern California race world right now. That's kind of the only racing we're getting for the most part right now. But
yeah,
it does take that pushing through just to hang most of the time. And then, like you said, some of those moments, one of the ones I keep bringing up, and I wasn't really raised in a competitive way all that much. I do have the competitive bug in me, and it's like very strong, but the way I was raised wasn't necessarily that way. So I've learned a lot of this competitive stuff in my 30s, in my mid to late 30s now. And so I was at a cyclocross race and this last season, and this is one of those first moments where it's like I was stoked because I was like going to get a podium. I was like, oh, I'm going to get this, third place. And then like something switched in my head, and that's where you're talking. I was like, no, I'm going to win, and that was just like a whole different gear. And it's like it takes certain people a lot to get to that point to where you learn. It's like, no, we're not settling for this. We're going to grit our teeth and like, this is game time. Let's turn it on. And so that's one of the things I've talked about on the podcast was that moment. And I did switch gears and chase down the guy in first and beat him, 2 turns before the finish line. And, that was a very, very powerful moment,
Yeah.
And so that's one of those things in cycling that I'm eternally grateful for, is like, it's reshaped the way I think about success as a whole,
Right.
it's just, and that has a lot to do with the way I was raised and the way that, I was, even pulled out of competition when I was younger, and was kind of built this whole like quitter's mentality that I've had to retrain my brain. Cycling's given me the ability to like completely redefine that. And so, yeah, it's super cool.
So
That's so cool.
2 points on that. So exactly that, that book that Mike referred to is actually called How Bad Do You Want It? And that's exactly what the premise of this book is. And he talks about these marathon runners and all these people that were third or second, the person ahead of them that was there, and they had, basically had to do something within their brain to say, no, 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 I'm not settling for second. And that's it was, his whole premise was mind over muscle is the whole premise of this book. He's not a sports psychologist. It's just tapping into say, no, 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 screw this. Third would be great, but I'm going to win. Right. And that's when that switch goes off. Flipping that back, though, I think you can apply that to like, here we are now, we've done it. We've drifted off into this racing scene, hardcore. There's a lot of people out there, right? The novice rider that they go out and the hill looks intimidating. And so they try it and they can't get up it. And so they quit. They never come back. They never come back, or they go out on that group ride and they get dropped. And so they go, well, this sucks. So I'm never coming back. Right. And so that's why I think the importance of your podcast is so important, because we've all been there. We've all had to suffer. We've all been there. And so, how that's one of my goals here is getting that person to say, you know what, you're right. 30 miles is hard. Start with 15, right? Yep. You're going to get dropped at some point. Just come back. Right. Because we've all been there. So, I think it's not only applicable to us trying to get a podium, but applicable to that person that's trying to break into the sport as well.
Yep. Yeah. It's, I'll have to read that book. That sounds like a good one. I never thought that this discipline would be a tool for that. I didn't think I was going to be as competitive as I am. I'm finding that like, I like that competition more and more. Which is really shitty because there's just not enough races around here as of late. But, you got to kind of pick and choose. It's like now we have cyclocross season coming up and I get really stoked for that. Last year was the first year I did that. And so, I think that it's really easy when you listen to a lot of these things for everybody's like competition, you want to race and you want to be the best. And yes, that's all great. But I think highlighting all these other things, there's so many challenges and so much story in between the guy who's just starting and the like pro racer. There's so much great shit in between there.
Yeah,
there's so much good experience and so much, because that's most of what you're doing. The racing part is such a small thing and it's very powerful and it's very awesome. And when you have a good race, there's nothing like it. But there's so much else going on in between there, whether it's the people you meet, the community, the training that works for you or that doesn't work for you. those little wins and successes throughout that whole process, I think, are such a bigger picture than the race wins, you know. And I don't want to talk down on race wins either, because that stuff is like, whew, you know, that's
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
that's the major endorphins right there. But you know, a lot of the other stuff is it adds up.
I think I've shared this story before, and I don't know how. So we can edit it, might, or we maybe get in trouble for
There's
this.
no
But
editing,
I
Dave.
was at a
We're not
cyclocross race.
editing.
I
We're
know.
not editing
Okay.
shit. Okay. No
I know.
editing.
I just
It all goes in.
I
Yeah.
just don't know how to sugarcoat this. So I'm just gonna say it, right? I was at a cyclocross race a couple years back, and I'll never forget it. As I was just getting there, I saw this woman go by. She was on the course. She was racing. There's no other way to describe it. She's morbidly obese, right? Morbidly, right? I saw her later. I was filling up my water bottle. I was moving to the start line. I said, "How did it go?" And she was there, and she goes, "Oh, I came in last again." And she couldn't have been happier, but she was out there doing it. I mean, she literally, from the tone of her voice, she goes, "Oh, I came in last. Yeah, again, as always."
Yeah.
But it's like she was out there, right? And so they're like, I'd love to have her on there. Where is her story right now? How far has she progressed? Because to your point, there's so much shit in between, the novice or the guy lining up for the first time and the guy that does this all the time and wins. There's so much happening in between. There's so much cool stuff.
Yeah, it's one of the great things
Yeah.
about cross is how inclusive it is, and how wild the energy is around it. Like you get cross is really for the bike nerds. It takes the bike nerds to another level. And the people that are there watching cross are either married to a bike nerd or been around it. And the vibe is always wild. Rodeo cross in Folsom is just like some of my favorite events have happened at Rodeo Cross, my favorite personal events because of that little heckler alley and the DJ and the whole thing. It's just like people here, I mean, it's just wild. And you do see a lot of different types of people there. There's always going to be the type A, whatever guys that are going to be the Sean Remy's, and maybe the Nicky Bradwells, who knows? But
it depends on the day, it depends on the day.
Yeah, but there's also a dude in a tutu with with a pink helmet, and he's having the ride of his life, and could care less about any of the finishing podium. There's not even a podium at Rodeo Cross. So that's another thing that's kind of cool. But yeah, so it's cool that way. Cross is a great introduction, even though it's for the nerds. If you could get somebody that's kind of curious about, that's a great way to get them kind of thinking more about like, hey, I could do this. This looks like fun. I could just go out here and have a good time and challenge myself and just see what I can do. And it doesn't really matter when I finish.
Hey, I want to be sensitive to time because I know you probably got a business to run, and I've got a family that wants to go to the beach and all that good stuff. But what's next? First of all, where can people find Bike Minded? What's next for it? And then what's your small business that you run?
I'll start the business side. I run a e-commerce business called Moto Delivered, Moto DLVRD. And it is a monthly subscription box for motocross. So we feature all kinds of different nutrition, apparel, tools, maintenance products. It's a monthly surprise subscription box. Every month you get something different. And so that was something I started out of a bedroom of my house in 2018. And since has grown to, we have a warehouse / office facility that I'm recording out of right now. And yeah, it just allows me to still be in the sport that I'm very passionate about. I don't ride so much anymore here and there, but with the little toddlers, I have had to distance myself a little bit just for, injury purposes.
Sure.
But so that's my business. Love doing it. It's, relatively small at this point, but, we have anywhere from 6 to 650 subscribers active right now. So yeah, it's growing to be something much bigger. So yeah, I love doing that.
Awesome.
As far as the pod goes, did you have a question?
No,
Okay.
I just said
Yeah.
awesome.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that little Zoom delay, gets you from
Yeah.
time to time.
Yeah.
But then the podcast, you can find Bike Minded Podcast. It's every episode you're going to get a little something different, but usually it's myself and Aaron, and sometimes we get Matt on the show depending on how busy his shop is. But yeah, you can find us on anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, or Apple Podcasts, whatever you want to call it. You can also find us on Instagram too. We're Bike Minded Pod, and we post our episodes up there, and do Q&A stuff on there every once in a while. But yeah, you guys should check us out. I definitely appreciate you guys having us on your pod, because I've been familiar with you guys, listened to quite a few of your episodes, and love what you guys are doing as well. So
Great. Yeah. Awesome.
Awesome.
Well, thanks, Nicky, for joining us. We've started a new thing. We're posting our podcasts on YouTube now. So YouTube,
awesome.
we bit the punk band Circle Jerks logo, right? So if you look
Yes,
at the
yes.
Cycle Jerks logo, it's basically the same dude. He's just been morphed into riding a bike. And so when you try to find us on YouTube, you type in Cycle Jerks, but it's all Circle Jerks that comes up. So yeah, and so it's a little tricky. So we're encouraging people to subscribe. If you like what we're doing, just subscribe. Then it'll be in your little network there, and you won't have to go through all the Circle Jerks. Although, hey, a big fan of the Circle Jerks back in
check
the
out
day.
the Circle Jerks too.
Circle Jerks are rad. Yeah, that's a cool punk band.
Absolutely.
And then also want to let you know, if you're interested in subscribing, you can check us out. You can subscribe by going to cyclejerkspodcast.buzzsprout.com. And there's a little subscribe button there for that. And then, yeah, Nicky, thank you so much for joining us today. We wish you nothing but success with your podcast and Moto Delivered. And I'm sure we'll see you out there on the race circuit.
Yeah, keep
appreciate
up the
it,
good work.
man. And let's get out on a ride, Mike.
Yeah,
it'd be a lot of fun. Both of you guys, it'd be nice to link up and actually get some pedaling in.
yeah. Well, I'm going to be out that way this week, so I'll hit you up. We can.
Yeah, hit me up. I like I said, I take rides out from my office here and hit the bike path and go wherever. So even if you want to just get a little bike path session, it'd be fun.
All right, sounds good. We'll take you up on it. All right, thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Nicky.
it.
Say hi to Matt for us.
I will. Thank you, guys.
All right. Bye.